but in 2020, motivation is different. Um, it's been a challenging year for all of us, and finding motivation is less about, finding joy or inspiration. It's really more about survival, especially when, what you do as for a living is kind of revolves around your ability to be creative. So, in trying to find the semblance of reality and what is the reality and sanity and health, I started thinking, I don't know what motivates me anymore. It doesn't really seem to have a purpose. I'm not anchored. And I think we can probably all relate to that. So I started kind of thinking about what we're going to talk about today, and I didn't want to go to a dark place because I think we've had enough darkness. So today's theme kind of sparked, um, you know, uh, the the whole theme was sparked by. So when you say the word radical, I think in this climate, it invokes some kind of fear. It implies something drastic or extreme, something that scares us. But when I started researching what radical really means, it's really about, it means roots, it means fundamentals. So when people talk about radical change, they're not talking about drastic change, they're talking about fundamental change. So it's really all about the context. Like radical, when a surfer says it, means something completely different than when somebody, who is a politician is trying to, insult somebody and calling them a radical. So I'm going to say that you can't be a radical and you can't do anything radical unless you're really connected to exactly who you are and you're familiar with and comfortable with your fundamentals, what inspires you, what your history is. And I also think of radical as a movement. I think when people are working together towards one common goal, whatever that looks like, I think that's radical too. So that kind of made me think, well, being in a band is a radical thing. Cooking in a kitchen is a radical thing because we're all working as a unit towards a common goal. Like running a restaurant has been sort of a radical thing for me in my life. It's kind of exposed all of my deepest insecurities, my flaws, the things that I'm most scared of. It has kind of pushed me towards facing all of those things and, you know, trying to access the energy that it takes to be creative in that moment when you're really scared of who you are and people finding out, that you're not as good as you know, supposedly are supposed to be. Imposter syndrome, all of those things, really come to the fore when you're doing something creative in the public eye. So, a lot of times when you're in that moment and you're faced with uh, the biggest challenge of your life, what feels like the biggest challenge of your life, it's really hard to access and harness creativity. So I'm going to say that at that point, it's really important to stop and do something that's not really goal oriented. And I feel like we've been kind of forced to be in that space in 2020. So maybe 2020 is trying to teach us something. It kind of has forced us to be a little bit intuitive and think through, you know, um, the knowledge of everything that we've known before and how it's going to be applied to how we get through this time and what the future might look like. So I started thinking, well, maybe 2020 is one of these times where like I look back at all the chapters of my life, and I'm sure that y'all can relate to different times in your life when everything kind of feels like it stops and you have to start over and reimagine a new future. So I wanted to just share some chapters of my life and maybe that'll help you get some perspective on this year if you need it. I know I do. I took this picture off of my dad's really old suitcase when we were packing up my parents' house after my mom passed away. And this was the suitcase that he brought with him from India when we all moved. And, I know that he was so proud to write USA as his address, but he doesn't have an address. He didn't know where he was going to live. He packed up a very secure life. I mean, we weren't wealthy, but everything was, okay. He had a great job. Um, he had three kids, 15. I was 8. My brother was 5. His wife, who didn't have a job, we didn't know where we were going to live, but we hopped on a plane and moved to America. I can't imagine how terrified he was. I think I had a sense that he was really scared, that my parents were both really scared, but I was excited. All of us kids were excited. Our entire time in India, we lived in northern India in Chandigarh, and we made this entire journey. We stopped in Tehran, stopped in Paris, and then landed in the Bronx, which was not exactly what I had pictured America to be. This On the left here, that little very dismal looking building was where we lived, across the street from a hospital. So the ambulance was 24/7, every 30 seconds. This chain link fence was where I went to school in this concrete jungle. And the buildings on the right are these very doomy, kind of dystopic looking buildings that I walk past to go to school every day. So it was definitely a very strange place to be. And at that point, our family was huddled in a small apartment. We didn't have a green card. We didn't know if we were going to stay. So being creative was not something that my parents felt like they could have. That was a luxury. And us kids, uh, to us, like, when I would go to my room and find records that I was like really discovering and getting into, basically being in the kitchen and finding these new bands were the only things that kind of anchored me to any sort of joy. I found new heroes, and they all had bangs like me. And they were making music that was way cooler than the Beatles and ABBA, which is what I was listening to in India, because it was very limited. Being creative was something that I kind of felt guilty about. There was a lot of expectation to do good in school, and like all of the things, my parents were just like, if we just do everything right, we'll get to stay, and our kids will have all the opportunities that we didn't have, or that we really had to struggle for. I think my parents didn't really unclench for 15 years, and we felt that as kids. The fantasy time that I had all involved either cooking, but more so like having my ears kind of close to the speaker, kind of memorizing not just lyrics, but like every sound of these records. And that was like the good thing about living in New York, is the radio stations were all great, and they were all playing, the Talking Heads and Devo, and I kind of discovered all of the cooler music, and there were flea markets that sold a lot of used records. So that was the thing. I was like, why did we move to this godforsaken place? But that was what kind of helped me realize. And then, of course, we had this pizza place across the street with arcade games and matzo ball soup. I mean, that definitely provided a lot of comfort to me. So, that whole chapter in my life was all, it was hard, but it kind of laid some fundamentals down for me. I realized that escapism was something that I used. And it took me a while to be okay with that, but that's what I was doing. And I went to school, through public school. It's all New Yorkie. I went to UMass, and then I made some weird choices. I decided to move to Raleigh. I had visited Raleigh for no particular reason. In spring break, I came to Raleigh, North Carolina, did a road trip with my girlfriend. And it was like, I don't know, a place that I really felt comfortable with. I loved the space. It felt like it had a lot of potential. And there was something about the feel, the size, and the look, and the building styles that made me feel at home. And it wasn't until like maybe 15 years later, that I realized that it's the architecture. This really reminded me of my home city in India, which was a city called Chandigarh, and that's kind of a modern city. And it was, I thought, designed by Le Corbusier. And he did, in fact, finish the design of the city, but only a couple of years ago, I found out that it was actually designed by the original city planner was a man named Nowitzki, and he was from Raleigh, and he is the designer of Dorton Arena. And he had laid the fundamental plans for my city, for the place that I grew up. So I really, at that point, not until 2018 did I realize this, but it kind of all came together. And I realized I am fundamentally connected to this place that I chose to call home in Raleigh. And there were so many things about it that just kind of spoke to me, and it was kind of quiet, and it wasn't deliberate, and it wasn't cognitive, but there was, these connections. So here's the farmers market in Chandigarh, and here's the farmers market in Raleigh. Yeah, everything's set up on the floor in milk crates in India. Here we have tables, but really it's all the same stuff. The seasons are so similar. When I first went to the farmers market in North Carolina, I don't think I really realized, but this, we used to go to the market in India every Sunday and stock up, our sort of like plan for the week. And that's now how I cook at the restaurant. We pay attention to the seasons. We go to the farmers market first to see what's about to happen. We talk to those farmers, and then we work with a lot of smaller farmers who don't have stalls at the market, and they'll send us their list, and we kind of, our menu flows not every week, but it does have this like seasonal flow to it. And I feel so strongly connected to this place because of what comes around, and because we were cooking with the same things in India. Our flavors kind of feel really natural to me. It's not really much of a stretch to put ginger with collards, because we were doing that, or with mustard greens. We definitely were doing that with mustard greens at home. So choosing to stay here and forge a life was felt radical. My parents were wondering why in the world I would want to live in the South. Um, but I don't know, it felt like home. So that was a radical choice. But I didn't start cooking immediately. I moved down here, and I was pretending that I was going to have this legitimate career in music management. So that was a way for me to balance like what my parents thought I was supposed to do with something creative. And I was always fueled by other people's creativity. So I started managing bands and had some success with that. Got people some record deals, and was trying to fake it till I make it. Ultimately, it all kind of fell apart. And I was, in my mid 20s. I had started my own company, and it all just kind of crumbled. And I got kind of spun into this like really deep depression. Like, what am I going to do with my life? I don't have a career. I don't have a path. And my now husband Paul and I just decided that we were going to start a band. I didn't really know how to play music. I hadn't really played an instrument, but I didn't let that, fuck it. Like, I just picked up the guitar and started practicing, and we left town and got in a van and started touring. And I just kind of learned in front of people. And there's nothing more not a more urgent teacher in the world than terror when you're sitting up there on stage. So I just kind of hid on stage right at that time, and had my hair in my face and just like played. I didn't want a microphone. I didn't want anything. I just wanted to have the time to live this fantasy out. So I was kind of reverting back to my childhood, and putting my ear in the speaker and just like making sounds, and hiding from the world until I had to make a decision. Well, that kind of evolved into this thing, and we started making records and putting out records and touring the country, and then touring Europe, and it became very much a life. But in order to support that, I started bartending, because most musicians have to have a restaurant job to support themselves until and if they get lucky. So we did that for a long time, a whole decade. And in the meantime, this opportunity came about to open this restaurant, this music venue, and this bar all in one place. And so that was, the next chapter. I'm kind of losing my place here. Yeah. So that was definitely, I don't think that I realized what I was doing. And I think if I had this really concrete vision of what it was going to be, how hard it was going to be, how much money it was going to take, how much work it was going to take, what the responsibilities really are, I bet I would not have done it. It was really difficult, but it was a challenge that I was really eager to meet. It was like, can I can I present the food that I consider mine? I mean, how egotistical. I felt like it was such an egotistical thing to say because it was a personal story and I didn't really have any training at all. I just thought maybe if people like Indian food and people like Southern food, maybe they'll just like this like flavor profile, maybe a legitimate thing that filled a void in Raleigh. But there were all these challenges. Again, it's the juxtaposition of creativity and structure, right? So like finding what do we call this cuisine? What category do we fall in on Yelp? How do you describe it? What's the handle on Twitter, the 5-word thing that explains everything? You can't talk about the history of cumin and cardamom and the diaspora of spices and immigrants and migrant labor and slave labor and how West Africa and India are connected with the South and how okra gumbo really is an expression of people being forced to leave their land to find a better life. I mean, that doesn't work, That's not a category on Facebook for your restaurant. So, that again, there's that the whole internal conversation of, is this legitimate? Is creativity okay? How does that balance with keeping the doors open and having these huge labor costs and making food that's really labor intensive, a little bit complicated? Do I use the real names of these dishes or do I anglicize them because it'll help people come into the doors? I mean, we were really slow in the beginning. I think people were expecting a very traditional butter chicken, chicken tikka masala, and saag paneer. All of those things weren't really represented on our menu, and that was on purpose because I really felt like, yeah, I could probably figure out how to make a really great version of that, but that doesn't feel very creative to me. And I'm not sure if that was the right call, and there's always room to change that in the future, but that's just what we did, and that's just what I thought was going to be the way forward. I'm still not sure. So I welcome your opinions on those choices that I made. I also think about service and hospitality, and it took a couple of years for me to really wrap my head around what exactly we were doing. We were welcoming people into our space. We were trying to, not just get through the meal, not just like stab the ticket, not just cross the courses out as they go out. We were really trying to make everybody on the team, front and back, work as one towards one mission. And now I realize that's a pretty radical thing to do. We want to anticipate what people need in their day without them having to even think about it, having to articulate it. And having, that kind of empathy does require a certain amount of listening. And I think you have to really put yourself in a frame of mind where you stop and you forget about your day, you leave your problems at home, and you really have this singular focus. And I think that puts in the ideal service, in the ideal day, it puts you in a frame of mind where hopefully you're open to ideas. A friend of mine, Bill Mooney, said to me a long time ago one night at King's when we were watching a show, and it was like in the beginning of Garland, and I was just like, oh my God, this is so hard. Why did I do this? And he said, sometimes when it feels the most unnatural and everything is really overwhelming, it's best to just stop and to force yourself to stop. And I was like, you're crazy. I can't stop. There's no way. Like, it's not doable. But he's right. And I think that sometimes when you force yourself to stop, and it doesn't have to be like a linear time stopping, I think it's a frame of mind. And I think it's a way of us just silencing our brain and allowing ourselves to really take in what's around us and to be creative without a goal and to be motivated by the process rather than the end product. And I think in that way, almost anything can be creative. So, in this time of COVID, I would like to maybe think about in the holiday season that's going to be very different than it has been ever in our lives, to to think about that as a radical choice, to not lament what we don't have, and to stop and think about what we could create out of this space. And maybe this might be a really memorable year, in a way that we don't think of it. I mean, we're all mad at it. We're all mad at this year. I definitely am. But I don't know. Maybe at some point we'll be able to redefine what it means to be creative and access that energy a little bit every now and then when things get back to normal. Thank you so much.
I really appreciated you walking us through all those different chapters and framing how each of those moments impacted you. And I'm really struck by how you've always kind of embraced all these challenges in front of you and dove in like right away, from opening a restaurant to music. What where do you get that from? Like, have you ever thought about like how you kind of gather that energy to do that and have that courage?
Well, it's funny when you say that. I picture myself trembling at the edge of a cliff, like my knees shaking and, my teeth chattering. But I think, I always find energy from working. I think movement and just putting one step in front of the other. Sometimes the big picture is motivating, but sometimes it's also really daunting. And especially when you don't know what that picture is supposed to look like. So I like to make lists, and I like to just get through the day, get all the stuff done that you can without, not being, I mean, definitely workaholicism, is that a word? Workaholism is an issue, and finding the time to stop and be healthy and go outside and eat good food and all of that stuff is um, very, very important. But I think just putting one foot in front of the other will get you there.
You basically have been radically forced to change your creativity for your life and your businesses. And it's probably wasn't the goal you had in mind. It's not where you saw yourself going. So how have you like accepted or embraced letting go of what you thought where you were headed?
I have an excellent therapist. um, it has not been an easy year, and there's definitely a lot of sadness, and a lot of anger and resentment. But I also think that this year has brought me closer to my friends, and I've discovered friendship in people that I just kind of thought of, like, we were just kind of colleagues. There's a group of women restaurant owners in town, and we've been meeting every week. And sometimes we have a lot of goals, but we also really need each other. And I have friends out of state, and who are in the restaurant business or not. I've reconnected with people that were in bands that we toured with and I haven't talked to in like 10, 15 years. And all of a sudden, this has like been this time when I think we realize that we're all in some weird boat together, regardless of where, we haven't seen each other. Like, it doesn't really matter. So I think, understanding that we're not alone has been really, really valuable and helpful. And it's ironic because we can't really be with people, So I think we're replacing this sort of we take for granted how much human contact we have every day, and especially in those first 2 months when we really didn't, when everybody really withdrew a lot. I think we were really forced to like figure out how to connect to people, because I think that as humans we really need to have that. We are not, even if we're an introvert like me, you still need people and you still need that connection. So I think that's been the singular thing that's kind of made whatever happens this year palpable.
Participants is curious about is they were really struck by the comparisons between Raleigh and Chandigarh, where you grew up. They were curious if you have been back and since you were a child, and what that experience was like for you after you made those connections.
Yeah, I went back in 1999 with my mom and my sister. And it was, well, actually, I went back twice. There were 2 years in a row. The first time Paul and I went, and it was after, everything kind of fell apart with my band management company. And it was before we started playing music, and I just like, I'd been flying to LA so much because my bands were both on LA labels at Interscope. So I had all of these points. So flew to India for free. Uh, and we traveled there for 3 weeks. And as a part of that, and it was with another couple who were on their honeymoon. What a really challenging honeymoon that was. But we went to India as a part of that trip. And, that was like, I was sort of a tourist, but then the next year when I went back with my mom and my sister, we went and saw from the outside the house that we used to live in. And we didn't own that house. It was like a part of the, there were sectors in Chandigarh. It's very, modern. And so that's where all the people who worked at the university lived. So we saw that house, and it was all still very, there was a lot of, confusion about who I was and how I connected to that place at that point for me. But it wasn't until 2018 I went back after my mom passed away. Paul and I went with my dad, and we went to India. We went to New Delhi, and we went to Chandigarh, and we stayed in a hotel in Chandigarh. Which was, I think, really important because usually we stayed with my aunt. And now this time we didn't because she moved to New Delhi anyway. But out of all of this, it was just like happenstance. My dad was on this conference call like 12 years before that. And he was talking to people like scientists all around the world. And they were talking about, I think, drug use for HIV, patients. And the guy who was the drug use expert in India lived in the same house that I grew up in. So, my dad made this connection with him, and, he was like, "Oh, where are you from? I used to live in Chandigarh. Where do you live?" "Oh, I live in sector 24. "Oh, what house?" "Oh, 102. I'm like, "Oh my God." So anyway, we go to Chandigarh in 2018, and he calls this guy, and they're coming back from Italy the next day because him and his wife had been on vacation. So they invited us to go inside, and I got to go inside that house that I hadn't been in since I was 8. And, the memories that you have as a kid, everything is so much bigger. And like, it was amazing. It was really, I didn't think that I would ever get to set foot in that kitchen again, where my grandmother and I used to spend so much time together, and see the room that she lived in. And, I remembered the bed that she had, and the crates of all of the things my parents were trying to hide from me, crates of pomegranates and Coca-Cola. Those were the two things that they hid from me. Anyway, long story, but yeah, I did get to go to Chandigarh again, and Paul and I got to be tourists, but then there was also this really beautiful personal connection. And I think that was the first time I really felt like um, I remembered a lot, a lot of memories came back. I wasn't fighting it anymore.
Okay, there's a question from Sarah. It says, you've supported other people's creativity too, both through Kings and more recently through an artist Black Lives Matter projection from Kings. I was curious how you see your role in supporting other people's creativity in the community.
Well, I don't think of myself as much of a, curator or anything like that. I just really, I think everybody loves to see other people being creative, and having a space to do that is, we're fortunate to be able to do it. When it happens, and it's, when people are there to witness it. I mean, we've had so many amazing nights at Kings, and so many, I mean, hundreds of bands have come through. Um, I mean, I think that's what makes a city vibrant. I think that's what makes a community special. And that's really what kind of felt like, really possible in Raleigh. I felt like there's a spirit there that cannot be put down, or here. Um, I don't know. It's not, we don't have an Applebee's downtown. You know what I mean? It's like, I think that there's something inherent in our city that inspires people to be creative and gives them permission and says, yeah, it's okay. We have this beautiful museum right downtown. We have CAM. And, I think there's a lot of things that people have done in this community that are very deliberate. And Kings is one of those spaces. And I'm glad that we've been able to keep it going as long as we have. Um, the Black Lives Matter projection, I really wanted to project that on the Confederate monument, but I couldn't figure out we couldn't figure out a place to put it because everything around it is, government property. So anyway, that wasn't ours. That was this person named Adam. He genius projection.
You've kind of talked about this at different parts in your presentation, and as a founder of Brown in the South, I think for a lot of people, I'm curious if you could connect like ways that you see that through line between like Southern culture, Southern food, and Indian food, and how do you bring those together as a source of inspiration for you?
Well, I think that answer changes from time to time. Actually, it's always kind of evolving. One thing about Brown in the South, I mean, we've talked about how closely connected our cultures are, how hospitality and food are sort of the center of both Indian culture and Southern culture. And I would imagine West African culture too. I think that, obviously a lot of ingredients are the same. Tea and cotton and sugar and all of the sort of, produce of this region, rice being so important in the Low Country. I mean, there's so much there. Chai in India wouldn't be a thing without the Depression in the US, because, England had all this tea commodity that they had taken from India and they were trying to sell it to the South, and the Depression happened and they were like, what are we going to do with all this tea? So they created this huge campaign to sell tea to Indians, back to the Indians. We weren't chai drinkers. Tea was something fancy, and it wasn't until street vendors got a hold of it and double boiled it on top of a charcoal stove or a fire that, tea became something that we can't even have a conversation without in India. So, I mean, it's we're all super connected, and it just takes a little bit of digging to find that out. But for me personally, as a chef with Brown in the South, because none of us are really from the same part of India, cooking together has made me really excited about all the different regions. And actually, just in January, it feels like 5 years ago now, Paul and I went to India with Vishpat and Merwan Irani, who were the other two, who were the two folks, the two guys that really, it was their idea to do Brown in the South. But we went to India. We spent a lot of time in Gujarat, which is where Vish is from, and really where Merwan's, he's a Parsi, and his people ancestry-wise came into India from Gujarat. So I learned so much about that culture, and that food is very different from where I'm from. Punjabi food is sort of like what you find in your traditional Indian restaurant, is all based on Punjabi cooking loosely. But Gujarati food has this otherworldly beauty. It's the central ingredients are not wheat, they're chickpeas, and like there's just so much to learn, and it got me really inspired to really dig into the other regions. So right now I'm like, Punjabi stuff is kind of really boring to me, and I'm really excited about South Indian food and discovering all the regional beauty that India really has to offer.
I'm going to end us on this question. You've offered so much to our community. You have so much love for it. What can we do to support you? Is the question from one of our participants.
Oh, I mean, I'm here, and I'm really grateful for everybody, to join this conversation. Come see us at Garland if you feel comfortable. We're doing outside. We're doing takeout. We'll see what the next few weeks and months look like, but I'm just happy to be a part of this wonderful and supportive community. It's an amazing place, and I hope everybody really is inspired by it and the wonderful people that we have here.